Hello. Today we're going to talk about the issue of Tiananmen in Beijing, China. As a discussion of the issue of the revolution or revolt, the protest of Chinese people in the square of Tiananmen in Beijing in China. And some issues about how it is handled in media. Okay, so first we're gonna go through some facts about this, and also some facts about other comparable revolts and revolutions in modern history, and then we are gonna ask some relevant questions, and then we're gonna talk about the issues about then we're gonna present some issues about the coverage of Tiananmen every year in media, and then we're gonna end like normally with some thoughts, discussions, and conclusions. Okay, so the issue of Tiananmen is that not the issue. Okay, we're gonna start with the facts. Okay, the facts about Tiananmen, the protest and the revolt that occurred there, is that it was a protest, a type of revolution, a revolt. It was an internal country situation, a confrontation between Chinese people and Chinese government, the Chinese citizens against the representatives of the Chinese government. And like it's gonna be clear like a little bit later, revolts and revolutions, protests happen in most countries, basically all countries, in modern history and also like before that. And people died in the protests of Tiananmen, but death is a characteristic of protests and revolutions and revolts. So I mean, it's sad, but it happens in protests and revolutions and revolts. It's very common that deaths happen in protests and revolutions. So I mean, it's sad, but it's not specific to a protest in China. And but I mean, like all protests don't result in death. In China also, China has other protests too, and they don't result in death. So I mean, if that happens, it's sad, but death in revolts, protests, and revolutions is a characteristic of the phenomena. And let's just like mention like a very recent protest that happened in America in January 6th, where angry citizens tried to take over the government through an insurrection, a protest, a revolution, a revolt that resulted in people dying. So I mean, it's a protest and people die commonly during like mass protests. So it's sad, but it happens. So let's just go through a couple of revolts and protests in modern history that unfortunately resulted in people dying. Comparable to the protest in China's Tiananmen. Okay. In Tunisia, a revolution occurred in December 17 of 2010, where 338 people died. In China, in Tiananmen, a protest revolt occurred in April 15, 1989, where the estimate is that hundreds of people died. Okay, in Iran, a revolution occurred in January 7 of 1977-1978, where the estimate is that between 500 people and thousands of people died. In Iraq, in July 14th, in 1958, a revolution occurred that resulted in hundreds dying. In Cuba, in 1953, there was, I don't have the date here, but the Cuban Revolution in 1953 was a revolution that resulted in about 2,000 people dying. And those are comparable revolutions to what happened in China in Tiananmen. And sometimes revolutions can spiral into revolutions and revolts can spiral into an internal war, like what happened in Sudan in 1955, August 18th. The revolt then spiraled into a civil war, an internal war in Sudan, where approximately 500,000 to 1 million people died. And in Spain, a revolt in 1936, July 17, a revolt that spiraled into an internal war, a civil war, resulted in approximately 500,000 people dying. So, a couple of questions need to be asked. Why is it Tiananmen that gets mentioned annually as a revolt that should be remembered internationally? What about the revolts in Tunisia, Iran, Iraq, Cuba, Sudan, and Spain? A similar amount of people were estimated to die. Why is China different? China has no democracy, but they don't kill black people for hundreds or thousands of years either, like they do in America. Iran has no democracy, so why isn't this revolution commemorated every year? Iraq has no democracy. Cuba has no democracy. What is it that makes China different? What is it that makes China different? It feels like a conspiracy that is based on bias, that is based on an agenda to attack only China. It feels like a conspiracy. It feels like an absolute conspiracy. You can have sympathy for the dead protesters in China, but you have no sympathy for the protesters in Cuba, Iran, Iraq, Tunisia. What is the difference? God, is this a conspiracy? Another question. What is more evil? A government suppressing the protests of its own citizens, like what occurred in China in Tiananmen, or a government that mass murders civilians of another country, like America did in Iraq, what deserves an annual commemoration of the civilians that died? Why don't the Iraq civilians that were murdered by America get their commemoration every year? Why does the dead protesters of China in Tiananmen get an annual commemoration? What is more evil? A war, an attack based on propaganda and lies against Iraq and their civilians? Or a suppression of a violent revolt in Tiananmen in China? What is more evil? What deserves a yearly commemoration? Like, what about the thousands and thousands of civilians murdered by USA, America, in other smaller, weaker countries? Bullying of a larger, stronger, richer country against a smaller, weaker country. Bullying combined with mass murder by using armies. What was the reason? Racism? Propaganda? Patriotic points won in a hysterical media? Voters whipped up into hysteria by xenophobes on television? What was the purpose? What was the purpose of attacking Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, Libya, where thousands and thousands of civilians died? Why don't these civilians get commemorated every year? China's Tiananmen gets thousands of articles every year written about it. But Iraq? When do these civilians get their yearly commemoration? Thousands and thousands of articles. How is... I mean, Tiananmen is not even comparable to the amount of civilians dead in these wars of America. It is not. It is not. But the media and the hysteria and the conspiracy against China over this is just... It's not appropriate to the level of people dead, or to the level of injustice. It is not. It was a sad event, but it's not the saddest event that needs so much hysteria and commemoration. That part is just a conspiracy. Tiananmen consistently gets media coverage every year in New York Times, CNN, and conspiracy websites. No, I mean like other conspiracy websites. Your racist uncle and so on and so on. Fox News. But you like never hear, I never hear about the Tunisian revolt, the Cuban revolt, the Egyptian revolt, the Iranian revolt, or any other revolts. Like, we never hear about that. We never hear about that. Never. The number of protesters dead were equal or of a comparable number to the people estimated to die in Tiananmen. Why is China unique in its yearly moral hysteria attack? Like, there is no specific reason. So it's just a conspiracy to lift one revolt and the deaths of that revolt out of all other revolts. It's just stop. Like, if you're gonna ignore all other protesters died in all other revolts, then Tiananmen is not relevant. Like, commemorate them all or commemorate none of them. It's like, it's not even sympathy or moral anymore, because you just ignore all other innocent protesters dead in revolt just to lift up China as if you got, you know, as if the protesters that died in China were like worth it, but the protesters that died in Iraq are not worth it. Isn't that kind of evil, though, to ignore them, the other protesters dead? Sympathy for one, but not sympathy for any others, even though they are even if they are equally innocent. Oh, the conspiracy! It's just crazy! Oh. Some news organizations dare to call the Tiananmen protest dead a situation of a massacre, but also that all people dead in the suppression of revolts are massacres. I mean, call them all massacres or call none of them massacres. But I mean, it's just a part of the goddamn conspiracy. I mean, just eulogize all dead protesters of revolts in all countries. Or don't eulogize any of them. Like, don't be twisted and hypocritical and like spread a conspiracy. It's just very immoral and just creepy. And also hella false. Okay, so let's conclude. What happened in Tiananmen was a sad event. The deaths of many people should never occur. Like, it's just not good. But the biased and the hypocritical and the hysterical and the sensational, conspiratorial attack on China is just weird. It's weird. It's weird. News organizations need to eulogize and commemorate all protester dead in all revolts that are comparable to China's revolt of Tiananmen. or not commemorate any of them. Dead, innocent protesters are of equal value in every country. Only talking about China's dead protesters is evil if you are gonna ignore all the other innocent protesters of all other countries. But if the news organization is willingly being a conspiracist news organization with that immorally, evilly ignores all other innocent protesters of all other revolts in all other countries, then I mean it's just a conspiracy. It's just a conspiracy. It's just a conspiracy and a pathetic attempt to attack China. It's just a hypocritical, immoral, dishonest conspiracy to attack China for Tiananmen. Tiananmen, as a protest, is not even top among its category. It's not. And it's insignificant compared to the civilians that were murdered by America in the Iraq War. And these civilians don't get a yearly commemoration. Why? Because the conspiracy is evil. Okay. It's just a conspiracy.